Good evening. I'm calling to order the meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education. It is December 21st, 2021, and we are meeting in a blended format. Some of us here at Casco Bay High School and others joining us via Zoom. Thank you everyone for being with us tonight. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo?
Présente.
Mr. Burke?
Here.
Ms. Russell-Better?
Here.
Ms. Biliu? Mr. Youssef?
Here.
Ms. Swami? Mr. McLaughlin?
Here.
Mr. Alzamili?
Here.
Ms. Santiago? Ms. Diu?
Adsum.
And Chair Figdor.
Here. I wanted to note for those present that board members Burke and Bondo are traveling, and so they are joining us via Zoom. With that, if everyone can join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, the Wolastoqey or Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, collectively known as the Wabanaki Confederacy, or people of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and classrooms. So with that, we are going to start tonight with public comment. This is public comment on issues that we are not voting on tonight. So if you, I don't see any participants, and there's no one in the audience today. So I don't see any public comment. So I'm going to go ahead and close public comment, and we will have public comment later for the issues that we're voting on tonight. So that brings us to the report of the chair. And I wanted to start tonight by saying that I have just recovered from COVID, and I want to strongly encourage everyone to do everything you can to protect yourself and your family and your community by getting fully vaccinated, including the third shot, the booster shot. I was very lucky in that I had what by all instances was a mild case, but still I was very sick, and I hadn't yet had the booster, and it underscored to me just how critical it is that we do everything we can and never let our guards down, and to ensure that we protect ourselves and those around us, as well as the school community and our Portland community. So as we go into the holiday season, I hope that everyone has a happy holiday, that you are able to be with loved ones, but that you do take every precaution, because COVID, as we know, is very serious. And if I could go back and have not gotten sick, it was worse than I expected by quite a lot. And so I really hope that everyone can have a healthy holiday season, but also ensure that you're doing everything you can to protect yourself and the community. I also wanted to take this opportunity to appreciate and thank the superintendent and his cabinet and our entire staff for their tireless work this year in what has been an incredibly challenging year. The pandemic has thrown curveball after curveball at us, and we have stayed true to our mission and have gone beyond in countless ways to serve the children of Portland. So I hope that our staff has a restful break, and I just want to convey on behalf of the board our deep appreciation, and I would look forward to a better 2022. And I am optimistic and hopeful because of the tremendous work of our leadership in the district and all of the staff in all of our buildings across the district. So thank you so much. And with that, that concludes my remarks. So I'm going to turn to the superintendent. Mr. Batana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to report that we were awarded $175,000 to support, we were awarded $175 by the New Schools Venture Fund to support our work to diversify our workforce, with a focus on supporting educational technicians to become teachers. We also received $35,000 in grants from UNUM to support key aspects of our equity work, including additional race in the U.S. classes, the development of our Wabanaki Studies video, and our Latinx engagement. Our amazing staff also received important recognitions recently. Kristen Luffler, a teacher at Lyman Moore Middle School, was one of 20 teachers from across the country selected to join the Pulitzer Center as a fellow this coming year. Talbot's Cindy Sewell was named a finalist to the Presidential Awards for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Education. Cindy, as many of you know, is one of two Maine finalists for this award, and she was recognized recently at Educate Maine's conference with their Leadership Award. As reported earlier, our school nurses were named Employee of the Year by the Maine School Boards Association. I've been visiting schools to present our nurses with the certificates and have found all of them in the heat of contact tracing. More on that later. On behalf of the Portland Public Schools, I would like to extend heartfelt condolences to the family of Lynn Goldfarb, a longtime volunteer and advocate for Reiki School. Lynn died on December 12th, and in lieu of flowers, she asked for donations to the winter gear closet at Reiki. This alone should give you a sense of the powerhouse that Lynn was and why she will be missed. As you know from public reporting, we expect that absent action by the City Council, the minimum wage will increase to $19.60 on January 1st, based on the city's existing emergency declaration. At this point, based on advice from our legal counsel, we're planning to move forward with implementation of this wage structure. Our current estimate is that it will impact about 300 employees and result in an estimated cost of almost $600,000 between now and the end of the fiscal year. I would now like to begin our school reopening update. As we've been doing for the past year, we provide a comprehensive update on our school reopening plans at board meetings. And so I want to start by talking about our case count. Last week, we again had a large number of cases, 30. That's following 55 cases in the previous 2 weeks, which included a shortened week. And it's important to remember that the high prevalence of cases continues to be largely the result of community spread. Maine continues to see higher incidence of cases than at any time during the pandemic. An analysis of the quarantined students by our nursing staff concluded that fewer than 1% of those students actually contract COVID during the quarantine period. It's impossible to conclude that those cases are related to their school exposure, but even so, it is very isolated. Again, a testament to our mitigation strategies. It's also possible that some of these close contacts were asymptomatic. Because we do not have ongoing testing for high school students and not all of our students participate in pooled testing, it's not possible to say how many of those cases there are that we've never been able to identify. Nevertheless, it's becoming increasingly visible that we are spending an enormous amount of time and energy on contact tracing with relatively little reason to do so. As a result, last week, we worked with our medical team to appeal to the Maine CDC to consider relaxing the guidelines for contact tracing. As I mentioned earlier in my remarks about my firsthand experience visiting our nurses, they are exhausted and they identify the challenges associated with contact tracing as central to that exhaustion. With the mounting evidence that as long as we keep our robust mitigation measures in place, we see few cases of in-school transmission, we are advocating for this change. Last week, the US CDC endorsed a test-to-stay approach to quarantines. As you know, we are currently implementing pooled testing that allows our students in grades pre-K through 8 to remain in school if they're participating in that testing. We're actively working to expand this to our athletes, as I've mentioned before, and following that, we will look to implement more broadly at the high school level. At this point, the Maine CDC and DOE's guidance does not permit a non-school administered test to serve for this purpose. We will explore the possibility of allowing this in the future, but again, it would be made easier by a relaxing of the contact tracing protocols to allow our nurses the opportunity to review any of those test results if we had them. Finally, some have asked whether we should return to school after the break in remote format. We explored that possibility with our medical team a couple of weeks ago. They concluded that we should indeed anticipate an uptick whenever we come back, whether that's the first week or the third week in January, as the vast majority of cases derive from community transmission. Thus, they determined that being remote for a week delays that inevitable increase, but it doesn't make it go away. Certainly, there is more visitation during the holiday period, but as with Thanksgiving, that did not translate to increased transmission within schools. In other words, our internal mitigation strategies are working. Thus, we believe that the benefits for being remote do not outweigh the need for in-person learning for students, which has been the central organizing principle for this year. I would like to transition to vaccines. We've now completed the second round of vaccines so that nearly 1,000 students ages 5 through 11 will be fully vaccinated by the time we return from the winter break. Note the exception of Talbot, where the second vaccine clinic will happen immediately after the break. Today, I'm announcing that we will look to extend our successful fall incentive for staff vaccination to encourage everyone receiving their booster shots, as Chair Figdor just suggested. The scientists are telling us that these shots will be critical in providing the needed immunity from contracting the new COVID variant and continues to protect even those who contract it from severe illness. Our HR team will be sharing details on how that program will work in the new year. As I mentioned at the last meeting, we will be requiring unvaccinated staff to test weekly using our pooled testing resources in the new year. In concluding today, I would like to read an excerpt from my end of the year message to our amazing Portland Public Schools people. That message is going out in our staff newsletter today. Halfway through the 2021-2022 school year, it has become clear that this is not the kind of school year we envisioned last June. We've been coping with severe staff shortages. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to pose significant challenges, and the rapid increase of the new Omicron variant only adds to our uncertainty. These trying circumstances have added incredible stress and strain for all staff and made your jobs so much harder. Yet, you have worked unceasingly ever since school started this fall to show up for our students and community. You've made school as normal as possible to help our students succeed despite the challenges. As I reflect back on 2021, I count our stellar Portland Public Schools people as an asset for which I am deeply, deeply grateful. Thank you for all you do. Our health and safety protocols with vaccines, universal masking, and pool testing, topping the list of protections, have been making in-person learning possible this year. Thank you for everything you've done to follow these mitigation measures and make sure our students do as well. I'm hopeful for a better 2022, and I'm also confident that whatever challenges the new year might bring, we'll be able to successfully take them on by continuing to work together. In the meantime, I wish everyone a winter break that is safe, restful, rewarding, and restorative experience. I would extend that final wish to everyone in the Portland Public Schools community. We have overcome significant challenges by working together. Let's continue to do that in the new year and take the next week to strengthen our commitment as a community and rebuild and restore our reserves of goodwill for each other. And that concludes my report.
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. Are there any questions for the superintendent on his school reopening plan update?
Yes, Chair, I have a couple of questions.
Go ahead, please, Ms. Bondo.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Superintendent, for the update. And I just want to recognize all our nurses for everything they're doing and try just to maintain the emotion, the social emotion, and everything will be fine. So my quick question is about the mitigation measure. So now, because it's the winter, are we doing with our building ventilation?
No, we have not changed any of our mitigation measures. So no, we have not done any additional mitigation measures.
Okay, but the ventilation of the building, because now the winter student will be mostly in class, so just checking on the maintenance, everything is going with the buildings. I mean, the ventilation, everything is updated.
To the best of my knowledge, I mean, we continue to have those same, we have the same mitigation measures in place there that we've had all along. So where we've recommended the windows be open, windows should be open. Where we have fans and other ventilation aids and things along those lines, those are in place. But we haven't added anything or made any changes from what we used last winter and what we've had in place throughout the fall. It's true that, students will be indoors more. One of the things that we did, and I mentioned this in my last report, was to pull up the tents for the year. That was based on recommendations from our facility staff as well as our outdoor learning coordinator. Doesn't mean that people can't go outside. We just took down the tents because they're just not set up to be able to withstand the hardships of winter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And my second one is about the sports. I think last meeting we've been talking about the mask, and we may try to find some appropriate mask for our athletes. Did we have any follow-up with that?
Yeah, I followed up from the meeting and asked our athletic directors to pilot multiple options. I believe that, I know that Portland High School has procured a large number of disposable masks that are what they believe the students preferred. I don't have an update yet from Deering High School, but I will follow up.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm done.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Are there, Ms. Russell-Better, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Superintendent, for the update. I'm really encouraged to hear about the under 1%, what would you call that, transmission of, the information saying that the transmission after quarantine is so low. So that's really reassuring. And I am so grateful for all of the work that nurses are doing, but I agree that it's not, it's not sustainable, the level of work that's being done. So appreciating that nurses are exhausted, and I do hope that there'll be an outcome from the requests that we've made. I have a few questions. One was just clarifying, Superintendent, was a little confused about, I know you mentioned the test to stay approach, and then I did understand about, you said that the DOE and CDC do not allow non-school administered tests. But could you explain, was that in relation to quarantining and returning to school, or help me with what was the context of?
To allow someone to return to school that was identified as a close contact.
Okay. So in lieu of doing the whole 10-day, was that the, okay.
Right. Currently, we don't, somebody can't take them to their local doctor, get a negative test, and then bring that back to school.
Okay. And so, thank you. So, and following up to that, I just had a question about, I know President Biden has, just announced about rapid test availability to families. Is there anything we're hearing about rapid test availability for schools? Is that a piece that's...
As you know, we currently do rapid testing for anybody who is in a pool that comes back positive. And that's the extent of our access to rapid testing. So that's all that we've been able to do up until now, is to, in those cases where somebody is in a pool, the pool tests, positive, then everybody that is in that pool is given a rapid test. And that's the decision on which we say whether somebody needs to go home or they can stay, because they're going to be tested again in a week.
So I guess I was thinking more in line with that issue of the quarantining. Do you see any possibility of, I know we're trying to see if there'll be any exception made, but any way in which at school rapid testing could be administered to allow students to come back?
So we we have the pool testing. That is PCR testing for anybody that wants it, pre-kindergarten through 8th grade. We're next doing that for athletes, and then we will do that for our high school students, right? So that is a more precise measure of whether somebody has COVID or not than the rapid tests. Rapid tests for asymptomatic individuals are not super precise. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% or something like that. So it is not a particularly helpful thing to just have that be broadly administered to everyone on an ongoing basis. We don't currently have access to the number of tests that would be needed for that. So I think what we're hoping happens is, with a reduction in the follow-up testing, in the follow-up contact tracing, that will allow us to be in a situation where somebody who is genuinely a close contact and would need to be excluded would be able to be tested at home, by their, at the Jetport or wherever it is that they're able to get a test, and then bring that back to school, and we would be able to allow them to come back.
And that's a PCR test. And you're talking about a PCR test. Okay. Okay. So it doesn't sound like there's anything I've missed about Biden speaking to specifically schools.
I know he spoke today. I know that he promised there were going to be 1 billion tests, but other than that, I don't know.
Nothing specific for anything. Education. Okay. Thank you. And so we just are in the period of waiting to hear from Maine DOE and CDC regarding that request. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And let me just add to that. We're not the only ones who are, writing this as an organized, campaign by school, leaders across the state to get some movement on that, because everybody is in that same situation.
And do you know, Superintendent, if other schools also have that data that you shared about the out of the quarantine?
I don't know that they have it, at that level. I know that in general, the sense that people have is that not too many of the students who get quarantined actually wind up, and particularly in places where they follow masking and, distancing and try to be outdoors as much as possible, and all of those other mitigation measures.
Okay, thank you. Another question I had was just regarding tracking of booster shots for staff. Is that something that there's any plan to keep track of, just like vaccination status?
Yeah, I mean, that's what Barb and her team will work on, and we'll have something to update you in the new year.
Because
we
I'm
don't have
guessing
that plan worked out yet. But we're assuming it'll be similar to what we did with with the actual vaccines, which was, somebody physically viewing the booster, on somebody's vaccine card.
Good. Okay. I'm just happy to hear that, because I do feel like at this point, doing that really, to me, feels like that's being fully vaccinated, which is, our expectation is getting as many staff as possible. So I think I just would like to know that we're, following the same system that we were doing previously with being vaccinated. I'm wondering, is there any potential plan to have any clinics in schools or special access for staff? I mean, I know it's been difficult for people to get.
I know that there isn't any specific plans right now that I'm aware of. I don't know, Aaron, if you know of any. I know that there are a significant number of clinics that are happening in the community, and that we've been, promoting those heavily in all of our communication, to staff as well as to members of the community and so on. We've, publicized all of those locations.
Okay. And I'm assuming that many staff have already done that on their own. I have heard stories of people waiting for hours at some of those recent ones. So just my concern being, I, wouldn't want it to be for lack of access, that anyone wasn't able to get an appointment. So that would be great if, just keeping us updated in the new year with the numbers, that would be really helpful. Okay, I think my other question was just regarding, I'm just wondering with, the expectation that Omicron is, just so contagious, and the fact that we probably will have multiple staff members, that are also vaccinated, becoming infected. And I'm just wondering, with, staff challenges already as they are, one thing I just wanted to make sure I understood too, is I don't know at this point right now, if there's a staff person who gets COVID, how does the protocol about close contact and quarantine, how does that work right now for staff?
Aaron, maybe you can help me with this, but in general, if the staff member is vaccinated, they are not, if they're a close contact and they're vaccinated, they do not have to quarantine.
Okay.
If a vaccinated person is symptomatic, and, is, tests positive, then obviously they need to isolate for the duration of the period, and until they have no symptoms and test negative to be able to return to work.
Okay.
Did I get that right?
Yeah. Yep. You did. It's the standard operating procedure doesn't differentiate between like students and staff. It's just anybody who's fully vaccinated is one of the exception criteria.
Okay.
And then back on the previous question, in terms of any clinics for staff, do we have anything in the works?
No, we don't currently. Our designated health partner is Northern Light, who's partnered with us, and they are just, suffer from some of the same staffing challenges and bandwidth. They're incredibly busy and had prioritized doing the 5 to 11-year-old vaccination clinics. So those, we just wrapped those up. So, and there have been available community sites for boosters. So, over moving into January, we'll see how that landscape changes, as these, kind of clinics across the region for, elementary, the 5 to 11-year-olds kind of wrap up, if that changes. But that's why, to date, we don't have any plans for additional adult boosters.
Thank you. I think I just thought of another thought that came in my mind is just our staff, work all day. Those clinics are often daytime hours up till, the evening. And so I'm hoping that we'll get information that staff have been able to access them, but I just want to advocate that I do feel like it's, part of our responsibility to make sure that that all of our staff that want to, do the right thing and get boosted, that we are ensuring we're doing everything we can. And I totally understand that the staffing, is an issue and getting people, but I hear what Mr. Townsend is saying, that, perhaps after our clinics for kids are done, I just would like to consider, or maybe it's in conjunction with finding out numbers that are boosted. Hey, if we already have a lot that have been able to get them in the community, that's great. I just hear anecdotally that a lot of people I hear are having a hard time, or, they can't wait for hours at the, open times that have been, I got mine because I work for Maine Med, and I had, so it's like, there's some people who have access because they just do for work, and plenty of people that just, you're working full time, you have a family. It's really hard to, get to one of these clinics or get into your own doctor's office. It's just hard. You're on the phone for hours trying to hold to get, so just putting that plug in there, that I understand that it's more work for us and more work for the healthcare system. But I just want to keep on that, making sure people have access. So thank you. And then Superintendent, the other piece about the staffing, what I wanted to ask was just, in my mind, I was trying to picture, because I don't know really what the sub situation is, except that I imagine it is as difficult with other staffing. So I'm just wondering how, what are the thinking ahead about possible, you have a number of classroom teachers who are out, with Omicron, and kind of how does making decisions about, how you get coverage and then kind of grades.
I mean, this is the work that we do now.
Yeah.
As had to close, classrooms throughout the year when we've been in those situations. And, in those cases where staff are able to teach the students remotely, we've done that. In other cases, we've just not had class, for those periods of time. They've been few and far between. We will continue to use the same decision-making process that we've used in these instances. We were very concerned last week with Talbot and, rallied and figured out ways in which we could, bring in substitutes, and, staff from our departments were redeployed in order to be able to do that. So we'll continue to do that. And obviously, if we get to a point where there's too many, then, those are the places where we wind up having to close classrooms. But that's not different from what we do right now, Ms. Russell-Better.
Okay. I guess I'm just picturing, do you feel like staff and even technology, do you feel like, were we in a position where we had to have classrooms go remote? Do you feel like that's something?
We have a plan for that. Yeah. If you recall, we have 10 days of remote instruction packets ready to go for all of our elementary students. So if we were ever in that situation, so for example, if we had decided to close and go remote for the first 2 weeks after we came back from break, we had materials prepared for that purpose. So we have a plan. We want to not use it, to the extent that we possibly can, because we want to keep schools open. But when that happens, we do have, structures in place to allow us to continue some level of education, which is not the same as the education that our kids get when they're in school in person.
Well, I guess I'm thinking differently than quarantine. I mean, my child was in quarantine and had that offered, but I was thinking more, if we're talking about, we have outbreaks where, staff and students are not in person. Is there any plan for more of a remote?
That's what I'm referring to. So, I will be happy. Assistant Superintendent Nally and her team have developed those packets. So we would be happy to share that information. I don't know, Malia, if there's anything that you want to add about that right now. I saw you come on camera, but I don't know if there's anything else. I mean, we do have a plan. It's all I can, so if we're ever in that situation where we need to close school, we do have a 10-day plan for our elementary students. And then for our high school and middle school students, we would transition to using the devices that they have and, providing instruction remotely as we did, for all of last year, for all intents and purposes. Malia, I don't know on the...
No, we've reviewed this with the board previously, so I'm happy to send you the materials we've shared with you before. We have a remote plan for elementary, middle, and high school. Like the superintendent mentioned, we have 10 days of prepared materials plus experience with how we move to full remote, Google Classroom for middle and high school. So I'm not sure, Ms. Russell, better what you are looking to understand, but I think we have a plan. We've shared it before, and I'm definitely happy to resurface some of those details if you want.
Okay, thank you. No, I think maybe I wasn't clear in that. I think I was just asking whether if the situation were to turn into being, this doesn't feel like we can be I guess I was wondering if there's any more thinking. I understand that plan that you're talking about with the 10-day, but I was picturing, more, we have multiple staff that are out for, longer period. We're talking way more than 10. So I think I was just wondering more as far as some further robust remote plan. And I understand middle and high, that's different. And I get that piece because that's been more in play, right? Doing the remote last year, right? So I think that was my question. Not that I don't see what has been done, but just
yeah, I'm sorry. That's as robust as it is. I'd be happy to have a further conversation with you about what you're looking for because we feel it's robust.
Okay, so meaning that we would not have any plan for there being more of a remote school for younger students. Were we not in a position in the community to be able to have staff in buildings? Were we in a situation that?
I don't know how else to say that we have a 10-day plan for that. And after that, we would transition to, this is how we teach.
Okay.
That's all that I can really say. That's what we did all of last year. And that's what we will do again if we need to, God forbid. So, we have the first 10 days covered so that people can then figure out, how am I continuing after these 10 days? I don't know how else to explain it.
Okay. So I'm sorry, Superintendent, I just wasn't clear that after the 10 days, we're talking about, we would be going into a Google Classroom and remote sort of a setup. That was the piece I wasn't understanding, the post 10-day plan. That was all. I wasn't asking for like a new plan. I just wasn't wrapping my head around the time frame of whether it was more of a dire, not being able to be in person situation. I was trying to get my head around that piece. So sorry if I wasn't clear in my question. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Russell-Better.
Yeah, I had a question about pool testing in high school, if you're going to implement that, and when do you think that will happen?
Yeah, it's our plan, as I mentioned, in my remarks, it's our plan to do it in phases. So we're starting for athletes, and then we're going to move it to the rest of the schools. It's really tied into capacity. Again, to the extent that we're doing all of this contact tracing and things along those lines, that subtracts capacity from actually being able to administer that program. There's a staffing need that we currently haven't covered, but I know that we've been in conversations with the vendor about getting staffing to enable us to do that. So we are hoping that by the end of January, we will be able to have pool testing in place at the high school level. It gets very difficult to do contact tracing at the high school level. And one of the reasons that we shied away from doing that is because of, under the current contact tracing requirements, if there's somebody in a pool that tests positive, we would need to, test everybody in that pool. And, anybody who was in contact with the positive students would then be quarantined, unless they were vaccinated or had participated in a pool that came back negative or something along those lines. So to the extent that we're able to relax some of those contact tracing requirements, it makes it more tenable for us to be able to do the pool testing at the high school level, but we're moving in that direction. And of course, that's voluntary, so it also requires people to sign up for it. We've been very successful at the elementary and middle school level with somewhere around 75% of our students who are signed up for it, but that other 25% is then subject to quarantines and things along those lines when they, when they're close contacts with somebody. Does that answer your question?
Excellent. Are there any other questions before we move on? Mr. Youssef.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Superintendent. For the contact tracing, do you think what made our rate 1% is the really keep tracking those contact trace?
Yeah, I know that's the sort of the hypothesis behind contact tracing, and the reason that has been, in the forefront of the public health recommendations. So I understand that, and I think it's only in the context of looking at our data and seeing the, the low percentage of students who are in, quarantine that we are making that recommendations. I'm not doubting whether it's helpful to do it. Obviously, it has been a part of our protocols and we've done it faithfully, and it's overwhelming our capacity, making it difficult for us to do some of the other things that we would like to do, like pool testing at the high school level and things along those lines. So that's the reason that we're doing. Like, everything during the pandemic, it's not a slam dunk, yeah, we should do it. It's, it's weighing the pros and the cons and trying to figure out, what the balance is for it.
Okay. So is it something specifically our district, or is something that is required?
No, it's currently a part of the, mitigation measures that are recommended at the state level. Aaron, I see your hand is up.
Well, the contact tracing specifically is governed by the governor's standard operating procedure, kind of details, so it applies to all of the schools in Maine.
And I will point out that we're the, one of few institutions that's required to do that. So, lots of other community serving, community facing entities are not required to follow those protocols. So I think that's also what makes it, challenging for us to, to have to do that in our context when other institutions aren't required to do that.
Oh, thank you. My other question is about the increase of minimum wage if the city council continue the state of emergency. And correct me if I'm wrong, what is going to happen with the hazard pay that we passed? Is it different if we have almost 300 employees to get increased?
No, I mean, this is the same. This is what we did last year when the state mandate for, the state emergency order was in place. So if you recall, in December of last year, we implemented that and we followed that all the way through to the end of summer school, really. And we discontinued it, at that time because the state requirement had been removed. recently it's been noted that given that Portland still has that requirement in place, it's complicated. So there was a court case that decided that was not required, but as a board, the board determined that we should do it nonetheless. Okay, so we did that all the way through June. In June, that was, the state, the state mandate, the emergency declaration by the governor was no longer in place, so we postponed it. The original bill said that the emergency declaration, the provisions, all of the provisions for the minimum wage hike that were passed by the voters last November went into effect on January 1st of 2022. And so that's the context in which this occurs, is that now the minimum wage requirements in full are kicking in. The only one that affects us is the emergency declaration one, because our minimum wage is higher than the minimum wage that's set by the minimum wage law. So the only one that really affects us is, the 1.5 times the minimum wage. So that's the $19.50. So that's the one that we will have to implement now.
Oh, great.
And I know I made a mess of that. But.
Thanks. So my last question is, once the $175,000 that Portland Public Schools receive, is it specifically for ed tech to become teachers, or
it's to support our work in that arena? So, some of it was already in our budget, in the budget that you approved last year. That was one component of it. This allows us to expand on that and strengthen it, as well as use, some of the money that was already in place to support, teachers becoming administrators and things along those lines.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. Okay, I think that brings the report of the superintendent to a close. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. I know from all the questions tonight about our COVID plans and protocols that there's just a high level anxiety with Omicron hitting Maine as cases are higher than they've ever been, and with there being uncertainty in terms of how things will look. So thank you so much for your update and for answering all of our questions. Now we're going to move to the report of the secretary, and tonight we are considering our minutes from our inauguration as well as our first business meeting. So we have two sets of minutes to consider. First is consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of December 6, 2021. So this was our inauguration. Is there a motion?
I move.
Mr. Youssef, seconded by Ms. Bondo. Are there any questions on the motion? So any questions on our minutes from December 6th from inauguration? Seeing none, I'm going to move to public comment. Is there any public comment on our minutes from our December 6th meeting? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on our minutes from December 6th? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you approve the minutes from our December 6, 2021 meeting. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better?
Yes, yes.
Ms. Biliou? We're voting on the meeting minutes from the inauguration.
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Ms. Dew?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor.
Yes. So the minutes pass unanimously with the students voting with the majority. Now we are on to consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of our December 7th, 2021 meeting. So this was our first business meeting of the year 2 weeks ago, Tuesday. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Youssef, and seconded by Ms. Russell Better. Are there any questions on the motion? So again, these are meeting minutes from our December 7th meeting. Seeing none, is there any public comment on our meeting minutes from December 7th? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Is there any board discussion on our minutes? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support approving our minutes from our December 7th, 2021 meeting. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliou,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so the meeting minutes from our December 7th meeting passed unanimously with the students voting with the majority. Now we're on to consent items. Mr. Superintendent, will you please speak to this item?
Yes, Madam Chair. Under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district. Required by that policy, all of the donations are listed in the board agenda under this item. Our practice is for each donor to receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. And I would like to thank the generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value and historical or commemorative significance, including for the Gerald E. Talbot Elementary School, which received snacks, games and adult masks from Kathy Cole of Portland, and Ocean Avenue Elementary School received 25 pairs of snow gloves from Christine Jenkinson of Portland, Maine. We are very grateful for their generous support and contributions to the work of the Portland Public Schools.
Excellent, thank you so much. Now we're on to old business. Consideration and action to approve revisions to board policy BCD. This is the policy on standing committees, special committees, and citizen advisory panels. Is there a motion?
I move.
Second.
Bondo, seconded by Mr. Youssef. Mr. Superintendent, will you please speak to this motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. Tonight, we're asking you to approve amendments to policy BCD, which is our standing committees, special committees, citizen advisory panels. As we discussed during last meeting's executive session, the changes in this policy are responsive to the current state of board membership. The revisions propose adding a section 6 to the policy that calls for special circumstances in 2022, whereby in the event the board is shorthanded for an extended period of time as a result of board vacancies, committee structures may be reorganized for the duration of such vacancies as determined by the superintendent with the approval of the board. This process is both responsive to the current circumstances in that it's limited in scope to our current situation and responsive to the existing policy, which requires any changes to the committee structure to go through formal board approval. It should be noted that the next item on the agenda is the proposed reconstitution of committees for this year. That item will be withdrawn if the board does not support this revision to the policy. Should also be noted that the policy calls for the approval to require two-thirds vote. So 4 out of the current elected board members must approve this revision. Following the approval, should it pass, my proposal, which has been developed cooperatively with Chair Figdor, is as follows. The Finance and Personnel and the Operations Committee, the Finance and Personnel Committee and the Operations Committee will be combined into a single Finance, Personnel, and Operations Committee. The Policy and Legislative Affairs Committee will be combined with the Curriculum and Educational Planning Committee into a Curriculum, Policy, and Legislative Affairs Committee. The Public Affairs Committee will not be constituted, and the full board will operate as a committee of the whole for the appointments committee purposes. So assuming approval tonight, I know that Chair Figdor is prepared to make appointments to those reconstituted committees. So I just want to note that consistent with the proposed revision, this reconfiguration will be only until such time as the board is at full capacity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. Are there questions on the motion?
I have a question, Chair.
Yes, Ms. Bondo, please go ahead.
Yeah, just for clarification, what the superintendent just mentioned at the end. I mean, when we're going to have a full board, we can resume with the public affairs and other committees?
That would be correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's what was my question.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Are there other questions on the motion? Seeing none, we're going to go to public comment. So is there any public comment on our proposed revisions to board policy BCD on our committees? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and go to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, I'll just say that I strongly support this proposal. I think we have a good plan for how to handle the work with the board members, with the 6 board members we have, as well as our student representatives. I feel confident in our plan. I think in terms of how we've combined committees, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm enthusiastic about getting started in this new structure in early 2022. So with that, Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll, and by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support the changes to board policy BCD.
Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliu,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes. So the policy passes unanimously with the students voting with the majority. Next, we're on to consideration and action to approve proposed revisions to board committee structure. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Board Member Burke, is there a second? Board Member Russell Better. Mr. Superintendent, did you have more that you wanted to speak to in terms of this
No,
motion?
if somebody during questions has any questions about what that the reconstitution would be, I'd be happy to repeat that, but I don't have anything to add to that. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to quickly summarize again. So we're combining finance and personnel, we're combining with operations, policy and legislative affairs, we're combining with curriculum and education planning. Public affairs is not going to be constituted for now, and appointments is going to operate as a committee of the whole to the extent that we need to move nominations forward. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, let's move to public comment. Is there any public comment on our proposal for how we constitute our committees while we're shorthanded in terms of board members in 2022? And that was Ms. Russell Better who seconded that motion, or this motion. Okay, seeing no public comment, I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support approving our proposed revisions to our board committee structure. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliu,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes. So our proposed revisions to board committee structure are approved unanimously with the students voting with the majority. And next we're on to our last item under old business, consideration and action to revise the buildings for our future governance structure. Is there a motion? Ms. Russell-Better, seconded by Mr. Youssef. Mr. Superintendent, will you like to speak to this motion?
Yes, Madam Chair, give me 1 second. So this item requests your approval to modify the BFOF governance structure as recommended in the resolution, specifically as follows. One, that the LISETH BLAC's purpose is complete and that the members of the LISETH BLAC should be notified of the end of their appointment and recognized for their service to the school and the district. Also, that the BLACs for Longfellow, Presumpscot, and Reiki be consolidated into one single district-wide BLAC, whose mission will remain to advise the DABC on school-specific issues and help communicate developments and progress to the school communities and surrounding communities. Also, the specifics are that the district-wide BLAC will consist of co-chairs, which will be appointed by the board chair, an at-large board member or a board member from one of the districts sending students to one of the schools, an at-large city councilor or a city councilor from one of the districts sending students to one of the schools, each school's principal or assistant principal, and no more than 3 additional staff per school appointed by the superintendent, a minimum of 3 members of the public from each of the 3 schools' attendance areas to be filled by current public members of the Reiki, Presumpscot, and Longfellow BLACs, and with vacancies filled through a public process appointed by the board's appointment committee. And finally, that up to an additional 3 at-large members of the public be tapped to serve on the district-wide BLAC to be filled by current public members of the Reiki, Presumpscot, and Longfellow BLACs, and with any vacancies filled through a public process and ultimately appointed by the board after recommendations from the appointments committee. So just for reference, the previous BLAC structured called for 1 committee for each school as follows. Co-chairs, which were appointed, so this is not a change, they're still appointed by the board chair. An at-large board member or board member from one of the districts sending students to the school, and an at-large city councilor or a city councilor from one of the districts sending students to the school. So, so that's one of the, that's what is currently in place. The school's principal or assistant principal, 3 staff members appointed by the superintendent, a minimum of 7 members of the public who reside in the school's attendance area appointed by the board's appointments committee. So a total of 21, if you think of it as 3 different boards, and up to 3 additional at-large members of the public for each of those. So a total of 9 appointed by the board's appointments committee. To summarize the changes, there's a single set of co-chairs instead of 1 co-chair for each of the BLACs. There's a single there is an additional at-large city councilor and school board member who are from one of the schools or from the at-large pool. 3 instead of 7 members from each school community, and a total of 3 at-large. So 3 instead of 7, so that's 9 instead of 21 total members from each of from the total of the 3 school communities, and 3 at-large additional 3 additional at-large members of the public instead of 3 from each of the committees. So if this is approved today, the next steps will include communicating with the existing members to gauge their interest in continuing to serve and bringing recommendations to the appointments committee, which will be the totality of the board, and subsequently to the board for approval. So that's the summary of the proposed changes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. So are there questions on the proposal before us? So this is to consolidate the buildings, the BLACs, the building level advisory committees into one. Ms. Dio.
I just have a quick question about this. I'm new to this. The sending students from the school. Do you mean like if it's the second district, then that would be Reiki School?
Correct.
Okay. That's my only question.
And that's the only one. But for example, in the case of Longfellow, students from District 4 and 5 are, and actually 3 as well, 3, 4, and 5 all send students to that school.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'm going to move to public comment. Is there any public comment on our proposed changes to the governance for the Buildings for the Future projects? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion?
Yeah, I have a
Ms. Bondo, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
No, it's
Ms. Delia.
it's okay. How would this work with with the absence of the other board members if because you said that we would need at-large representatives from the school board and city council. If we don't have those representatives, how would it work? Would we just substitute somebody else?
It's either an at-large member or a member from one of the, from the districts that send students to one of those schools. So there's 2 at-large members, both you and Mr. Youssef, and then either Ms. Bondo or Ms. Russell Better are representatives, currently appointed representatives from schools that send students. I'm sorry, and Mr. Burke as well.
Oh, so you're saying it's either or?
Not Ms. Bondo.
No, not Ms. Bondo, Mr. Burke.
And
okay,
myself.
but it's either or. It's not
Russell Better
necessarily.
Yeah. So this basically we're simplifying the structure, right? So before we had the district level advisory committee and the building committees for each of the schools. And now we're keeping the district level advisory committee, and rather than having then 4 separate school building committees, we're having one building. So before we needed a school board member and city councilor to chair each of those building committees. Now it's just one.
Okay.
So it makes sense at this juncture because we're at a different part of the process. The work is we've completed the design, the construction, we've completed LISAF entirely, and the construction is underway at the 3 remaining schools. So the need for this committee has changed. And so this is addressing that reality, but it does really simplify things to have one building level committee that is advising the district level advisory committee and the board on issues that are specific to those school buildings. And so we'll just have one school board member who is co-chairing that along with one city councilor.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So we are on discussion. So is there any discussion on this? Seeing none, I'll just say that as I just articulated, I do think that we're at a juncture where we're consolidating the building level advisory committees makes a lot of sense, is going to make our work more efficient while maintaining representation at each of the 3 schools that remains under construction. So I think this is a really good step, and I'm looking forward to moving forward with it in 2022. So by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support revising the buildings for our future governance structure as proposed. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliu,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so the motion passes unanimously with the students voting with the majority. So, friends, that is it. We are ready to adjourn. It's a very quick meeting tonight, which I think is fitting at the end of a very long and hard year. So I want to thank everyone for their dedication to Portland Public Schools, for your service, for all that you do for the district. I want to note that our first meeting in January is Tuesday, January 4th at 6 p.m. We will continue to have this blended format with members here and the public invited to Casco Bay High School, but also able to join us via Zoom. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn the business meeting?
A move.
Ms. Bondo, seconded by Ms. Russell Better. All in favor, just with a show of hands. It is unanimous, and we are adjourned at 7:12 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone. Happy holidays and
happy holidays.
New Year.
Happy New Year. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.